Hi, I'm Don Wunsch. I'm the Mary Kay Finley, Missouri Distinguished Professor of Computer Engineering at Missouri University of Science and Technology. And I'm conducting interviews for the IEEE Neural Network Society, Computational Intelligence Society History Committee. Today is September 10th, 2012. We're in Arlington, Virginia to interview Paul Werbos. Paul is the inventor of backpropagation. He's IEEE Fellow, IEEE Pioneer Award winner. And so, Paul, would you tell us your current contact information?
I'm working at the National Science Foundation. My email there is pwerbos@nsf.gov. It's also in the staff directory. And I have a personal website, www.werbos.com, which has some further connections.
Yeah, some great papers in there. And could you tell us about your formal education and training?
Okay, so I got into mathematics when I was very young, and so I completed what amounts to a full major in pure mathematics while I was in high school, taking courses at University of Pennsylvania and Princeton. If you've ever read the book A Beautiful Mind about John Nash, they talk about people hanging out in those easy chairs, including even a couple of young high school students. Well, I was one of them, the youngest of them. And then, after high school, I went to Harvard. I knew I was interested in neural networks at the time, and the course catalog didn't have a whole lot on that subject. So as a freshman, I took the one neuroscience course I could take as an undergraduate. You know, one freshman mathematical guy with a whole room full of pre-meds. And after that, I decided to major in economics because that was the closest I could find to addressing the question of a distributed system that makes optimal decisions. And frankly, the math made it easy and gave me time to do stuff with neural nets on my own time. And it has some relevance to public policy, which I've always been interested in. And then for graduate school, I knew that mathematics would give me a license to stay broad, not to become stovepiped, and so applied math PhD was pretty straightforward. I did digress for a master's degree in international political systems from London, and then master's and PhD in applied math at Harvard in decision and control, quantum physics, and mathematical methods, and then the backpropagation thesis, which was also multiple disciplines.
And your advisor was?
An interesting question. When they looked at what I wanted to do, the applied math committee at Harvard said, no one person can really cover all this, so they divided it up. And there was a statistics section led by Mosteller. There was a mathematical methods section, so really Bossert of Harvard. If anybody oversaw the mathematical backpropagation part, it was Bossert, although Larry Ho definitely showed up. He was very skeptical that you could ever use backpropagation for neural nets or that it would even work. But I proved it would work by proving the chain rule for order derivatives, and that allayed a lot of their anxieties. And then there was a section on political forecasting, applying all this stuff to predicting political things 100 years ahead of time, and that was under Carl Deutsch, who was my main thesis advisor.
And you also worked with Schwinger, right?
For the physics part, which was more the master's degree, I was a student of Julian Schwinger, who developed quantum field theory, and it was a good interaction, but by the time I got the PhD, it was clear it was going to take more than just 5 years to figure out what's really going on in quantum field theory. And after 40, 50 years, I think I finally do, but I knew I wasn't going to figure that out in time for a PhD.
So what was your first job in engineering or science?
Depends on how you classify jobs. My first regular real job as an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, they hired me in to be the quantitative person in a new cross-disciplinary public policy program. So I was using methods like backpropagation and robust statistics and utility theory and game theory to try to understand public policy. But it was public policy. And then I shifted from there to the Department of Energy, which was again cross-disciplinary. We were overseeing energy models. I developed a lot of large-scale econometric models, but backpropagation was a key tool to make these models work and predict well using real energy data. And technology was a critical part of the future of the energy. So the job was partly technology, partly economics, partly backpropagation. They called me an economist then because sort of the economists ruled the place, and I knew how to think as an economist. But then finally in 1988, I shifted to NSF, and I've been in the engineering directorate ever since.
Great. So what was your first paper published?
I forget whether it was 67 or 68, but it is on my website, probably in the Mind section under supplemental papers. There was a little journal called Kybernetica from Namur in Belgium, and the paper was called The Elements of Intelligence. I had already been thinking hard about how do you build a neural network-based intelligence system that mimics what's in the brain. And I had a lot of the elements there, a lot of the key ideas we later talked about with adaptive critics, backwards flows of information, Freud, dynamic programming. It was all in there in that 67, 68 paper, but it wasn't fully integrated yet. Before the thesis, which was in 74, I had just one other paper, which was in Nuovo Cimento Letters, on how to use backward time effects to explain what's going on in quantum theory.
Great. And what persuaded you to study engineering or science?
I think we already did that. It started when I was 8. I just already knew the mathematics and science was interesting to me. And I can remember telling my parents when I was 8 years old, they asked me, what are you going to do when you grow up? I said, I don't know. I'm really interested in mathematics, but I'm really interested in what I see in astronomy. They said, oh, you'll be an astrophysicist. So I told everybody I would be an astrophysicist. At 12, I was asking myself questions about what is the meaning of life. So I was really getting deep into philosophy and politics. But then a couple years later, I said, you know, solving these problems in philosophy and politics, you've got to understand the human mind. And I read Hebb when I was still in high school, just before I went to Harvard. And Hebb's book really inspired me a lot, but I think you already have that on tape.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, I think that we've done a couple of versions of this recording, but I think that this is, I think you should cover is there a person or event that influenced you? So you mentioned, go ahead and explain about Hebb's influence on you
so for the neural network field, it would be one thing. For mathematics and applied math, it would be a different.
Yeah, so go ahead and explain them both.
So for mathematics, it was really just something that happened to me, like a babysitter when I was 8 who left me her algebra book. She was a nice babysitter, and even at 8 I had some male hormones, so probably that influenced me, to be honest. I was going to Catholic school, and everybody said, don't study math, you'll be a freak. That probably got me to study it harder. But at the end of the day, the only single name I could mention as inspiring me in math was John von Neumann. And I have felt as if I've been in the shadow of von Neumann ever since I was 8. In some ways, I think von Neumann charted a path that a lot of people forgot about. And sometimes, in moments of delusions of grandeur, I think maybe I'm the only person on earth who is still following through to try to complete the visionary program that John von Neumann had in all the critical areas where mathematics can help us understand life much more deeply than we do as yet.
Are there some of his papers or books that you think are most important for people to read, or is it just his collected body of his literature?
Well, one of the ones I read when I was young was The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. He has a book in quantum physics, which is great, but it's not for everybody, and it's kind of hard to find. The What is Life book, Reproducing Automata, didn't excite me as much. Um, so, and some of his writings on neural networks are also kind of hard to find. It was kind of scary to me because here's John von Neumann answering fundamental questions, charting a vision for the future which is viable, and nobody is reading his papers even 20 years later, even after the whole world knows what a powerful thinker he is. I found myself saying, God, this is really scary. If I write things, I won't have quite the cachet von Neumann did. What's going to happen? Are we ever going to make progress in these areas if we forget so easily? So, but right now in the neural net area, you don't really have to go back to von Neumann. We do have stuff that captures a lot of that.
And the other one is Hebb, then.
And so in the neural network field, as I think it over, Hebb's book, I have to confess, I also read Computers and Thought, like when I was 15 or 14, from a computer course in the Moore School for high school students in computers. Minsky had a good paper there. Minsky's paper really got me thinking. He was going to use reinforcement learning to understand and replicate intelligence. Only later, when he discovered he couldn't get there by hacking, did he, join the dark side. But the bottom line is he started with a really good vision. It just took a little more mathematical power to go ahead and implement the vision and not just give up at the first, twitch.
And so by joining the dark side, you mean go over to symbolic AI approaches?
A variety of things like that. And let me not get into that world and all of the barnacles that live in that world. But yeah, Minsky's chapter in Computers and Thought by Feigenbaum and Feldman and Hebb's book were really important in my thinking.
Great. Well, we've re-recorded the first questions because I think they got corrupted, but then I think we've got the rest of the interview now. So, but I will say thank you again.
Well, thank you.